The night air outside Richmond, Virginia, carried that quiet suburban stillness that only broke when expensive cars rolled up to the gated entrances of private communities. Behind one of those gates sat a building with glass walls, polished steel fixtures, and a bold white sign that gleamed in the moonlight. The Jefferson Towers, luxury suites and residences. Monique Robinson adjusted the strap of her designer tote as she walked confidently into the lobby. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't sneaking in. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was walking into her own property. Suite 8C belonged to her, legally, officially, and beyond dispute. Her name was printed on the deed, filed in the county courthouse, sealed by the clerk's stamp. Still, as she moved toward the private elevator, the looks began. The concierge, a young white woman in a neatly pressed blazer, raised her eyebrows but said nothing. A pair of residents, a middle-aged couple dressed in tailored clothes, whispered to each other as they passed. Monique ignored it all. She'd seen those looks before. She was a successful black woman who owned space in a building where most people didn't expect to see someone like her. When she pressed the button for the elevator, footsteps echoed behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice belonged to Emily Clark, the property manager. Tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed, Emily carried herself like the building was her personal kingdom. She gave Monique a polite but frosty smile. "Can I ask what business you have here?" Monique turned slightly, her expression calm but firm. "I'm going up to my suite." Emily blinked. "Your suite?" "Yes," Monique replied evenly. "Suite 8C." For a split second, Emily's smile faltered. Then it returned, tighter this time. "Do you have identification? Residents are required to show proof of residency if requested." Monique tilted her head. She'd heard of residents being asked for IDs in hotels or gyms, but never in their own homes. "I'm not carrying the deed in my purse, if that's what you mean," she said. "But I do have my driver's license. You'll see the name matches." Emily took the ID, but her eyes narrowed anyway, scanning Monique's face, then the card, as if looking for something to disprove. Finally, she handed it back. "Please wait here a moment," she said, and without another word retreated to the front desk. Monique's jaw tightened. She knew what was happening. Emily wasn't verifying anything. She was stalling. Within 5 minutes, the revolving glass doors at the front of the lobby spun open, and in walked Officer Brad Kingston and Officer Kyle Anderson of the Richmond Police Department. Their uniforms looked crisp, their belts heavy with gear, and their faces carried the smug seriousness of men who believed their presence alone solved problems. "Evening, gentlemen," Emily greeted them, her relief obvious. She pointed in Monique's direction. "That's the woman. She claims she lives here." Brad Kingston approached with slow, deliberate steps. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like every hallway was his to dominate. "Ma'am," he said, shining his flashlight slightly upward, even though the lobby lights were already bright. "Mind telling me what you're doing in this building?" Monique kept her tone steady. "Like I told the manager, I live here, Suite 8C. Kyle Anderson joined in, his voice quieter but no less patronizing. "You have proof of that?" "Yes," Monique said firmly. She handed over her license again, though she knew it wouldn't matter. "And if you want more than that, I can get the deed. My name is Monique Robinson. It's on the county records. You can check right now." Kingston smirked, glancing at Anderson. "That's a funny story. Problem is, we got a call about a trespasser. Now, unless you can pull a deed out of thin air, I'm going to need you to come with us." Monique's friend, Danielle Moore, had just walked in, carrying 2 shopping bags. She froze when she saw the officers surrounding Monique. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Stay out of it," Kingston barked. "This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," Danielle shot back. "That's her suite. She owns it. Why are you treating her like she broke in?" Anderson's eyes darted nervously between Danielle and Monique, but Kingston's grin widened. He enjoyed the confrontation. "Ladies, this can go easy, or it can go hard. Either way, you're not staying here tonight." Emily Clark folded her arms, standing off to the side like a queen satisfied that her guards had restored order. Monique drew in a slow breath, her composure unshaken. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No," Kingston replied, leaning close enough that his badge gleamed under the light. "The mistake is thinking you belong here." The officers moved quickly after that. Anderson positioned himself near Monique's arm while Kingston gestured toward the door. Danielle shouted, demanding to know why they weren't verifying the deed, why they weren't even running the ID through their system, but her words bounced off the marble walls unanswered. In less than 10 minutes, Monique Robinson, the legal owner of Suite 8C, was escorted out of her own building, past neighbors who peeked out of their doorways and whispered among themselves. The humiliation was deliberate. The message was clear. But what Kingston and Anderson didn't realize was that this wasn't just another routine stop or a power trip they could brush off later. Monique Robinson wasn't just a black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was the rightful deed holder, with every legal document to prove it. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just expose two officers for overstepping. It would unravel a web of arrogance, prejudice, and corruption that had been festering far longer than anyone cared to admit. That night, Monique sat in her car in the dimly lit parking lot, Danielle by her side, both of them silent for several long minutes. Finally, Danielle broke it. "What are you going to do?" Monique's eyes stayed fixed on the glowing towers above. "What I always do," she said, her voice steady. "Fight. And this time, I have all the proof I need." The fight, though, would prove larger than either of them imagined. Because once the courtroom lights switched on, the arrogance of two officers and the quiet smirk of a property manager would explode into a case that shook the city and forced everyone to confront a truth they had tried for too long to ignore. And Monique Robinson would be at the center of it. The next morning, the glass towers of the Jefferson still gleamed under the Virginia sun, as though nothing had happened the night before. Residents carried on, sipping their coffee, walking their dogs, reading the paper in spotless lobbies. But behind the appearance of serenity, word spread quickly. Whispers about the woman who was escorted out traveled from floor to floor, exaggerated with each retelling. Some said she had tried to sneak in. Others insisted she was running some kind of scam. Few believed the truth, that Monique Robinson owned one of the building's most coveted suites. Monique, however, wasn't dwelling on whispers. She was already preparing. At her brother David Robinson's home just outside the city, the kitchen table was covered in documents, property deeds, closing statements, bank records, every piece of paper she'd ever signed when she bought Suite 8C. David, ever the steady hand in the family, leaned over the paperwork with furrowed brows. "They can't deny this," he said finally, holding up the stamped deed. "This is ironclad. They put you out of your own place, Monique. That's not just harassment. That's trespass on their part." Monique sipped her coffee, her gaze steady. "It's bigger than that, David. They wanted to make an example of me. Remind me that no matter what's on the paperwork, in their eyes, I don't belong." David shook his head, frustration boiling in his voice. "And the manager called them instead of just checking the records. She knew. She's seen you before." "She knew," Monique agreed quietly. Years earlier, Monique had built her career step by step, without shortcuts, without favors. She had started with a modest accounting practice, working long nights and weekends until her client list grew enough to give her stability. From there, she launched a consulting firm specializing in corporate compliance, a business most people overlooked, but one that quietly thrived in a city filled with mid-size companies desperate to stay on the right side of federal regulations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid. By her mid-30s, Monique had accumulated enough wealth to begin investing. Stocks, real estate, small businesses, she touched them all. And when the Jefferson Towers broke ground, she knew it was the kind of place she wanted not just to rent, but to own. Suite 8C wasn't just a symbol. It was a reward for decades of discipline. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the James River, polished marble floors stretched through the living room, and the private balcony caught every golden sunset. Monique had walked through dozens of properties before choosing that one, and when she signed the papers at closing, she felt something rare, a piece of permanence in a world that too often tried to push her aside. To Emily Clark, the building's manager, that permanence never seemed acceptable. She had questioned Monique from the beginning, subtle comments about new faces in the building, quiet scrutiny when Monique hosted gatherings, polite but loaded questions like, "And you own the suite outright?" It was the kind of suspicion that never attached itself to white residents. Still, Monique ignored it. She wasn't about to let anyone's prejudice dictate her peace, until the night the police showed up. Back at the Richmond Police Department, officers Brad Kingston and Kyle Anderson were filing their reports. The paperwork looked neat, official, and entirely detached from the truth. Kingston typed the words with casual arrogance. Subject was reported trespassing. Subject refused to provide verifiable proof of ownership. Subject became argumentative. Subject escorted off premises without incident. No mention of the deed. No mention of her name being on county records. No mention of Danielle Moore demanding that they verify her ownership. Just a story crafted to protect themselves and their decision to remove a black woman from her own home. Kyle Anderson leaned back in his chair, watching Kingston type. "You think this is going to come back on us?" he asked quietly. Kingston smirked. "It never does. We're just doing our job, right? Manager calls, we respond. Who's going to question that?" Anderson hesitated, then nodded slowly. He had been riding with Kingston for 2 years, long enough to see the pattern. Every time a call involved a black resident in a white-dominated neighborhood, Kingston handled it the same way: escalate, assert, eject. Anderson often wondered if it was worth the risk, but he never pushed back. Loyalty and silence kept him safe. But this case wasn't like the others. This time the woman had proof. This time the arrogance had gone too far. By noon, Monique had already contacted her attorney. Anthony Reed, a longtime community activist who had studied law before devoting his life to civil rights, agreed to represent her interests. He had seen dozens of cases like this, racial profiling dressed up as routine police work. But even he admitted Monique's case carried something rare, a hard, indisputable deed with her name stamped on it. "This isn't just about you," Anthony said, leaning across the table at his office. "This is about every person they've humiliated, every family they've tried to intimidate. The difference is, you have the paperwork to prove them wrong." Danielle, sitting nearby, crossed her arms. "And we've got witnesses. I was there. I saw the whole thing. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't even try." Anthony nodded. "We'll use that. But this isn't going to be simple. They're going to twist it. They're going to say they were just responding to a manager's call. They'll make it sound like they had no choice." Monique's voice cut through the tension, calm but resolute. "Then we show them they did have a choice. They chose prejudice over facts." Anthony leaned back, studying her. He could see the determination in her eyes, the kind of determination that didn't bend under intimidation. "If you're ready to fight," he said, "then we'll take this all the way." Word of the incident spread beyond the Jefferson Towers. Within days, local activists and community groups began organizing. Flyers appeared online. Luxury building, same old story. Black woman ejected from her own suite. News outlets started sniffing around. Reporters called the building manager for comment, but Emily Clark declined, hiding behind vague statements about security concerns. The police department issued a short press release defending Kingston and Anderson. "Our officers responded to a trespassing call in good faith and followed standard protocol," it read. "The matter is under review." To Monique, the statement was an insult. Standard protocol didn't involve ignoring a deed. Standard protocol didn't involve ejecting a homeowner without verification. Standard protocol didn't involve smirking in her face and telling her she didn't belong. But the department wasn't counting on one thing: Monique's refusal to back down. Behind closed doors, city officials started to sweat. Richmond wasn't new to controversy. The city carried a long, tangled history with race and policing. But this case had legs. Monique wasn't an anonymous victim. She was educated, successful, and had documentation to prove every word of her story. And as more people rallied around her, the pressure mounted. David Robinson, protective of his sister, gave his own statement at a community gathering. "This isn't just about Monique," he told the crowd. "This is about the message they send to every black resident in this city, that no matter how hard you work, no matter what you own, they'll still treat you like you don't belong." The applause shook the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, and the next morning his words were quoted in the Richmond Times. Inside the police department, Kingston rolled his eyes when he read the paper. "They're blowing this way out of proportion," he muttered to Anderson. Anderson, quieter than usual, didn't reply. He couldn't shake the image of Monique's calm defiance, her steady eyes as Kingston told her she didn't belong. For the first time, a seed of doubt lodged in his mind. By the end of the week, Anthony Reed had filed the paperwork for a lawsuit against the Richmond Police Department and the Jefferson Towers management. The legal complaint was straightforward: unlawful removal from private property, racial discrimination, abuse of authority. Attached to the complaint was a certified copy of the deed for Suite 8C, with Monique Robinson's name printed clearly at the top. The building's attorneys scrambled. The department braced for backlash, and Monique prepared herself for the long road ahead. She knew this wouldn't be easy. The system was built to protect itself. But she also knew something the officers and the manager had underestimated. The truth wasn't on their side. And once it reached the courtroom, that truth would explode louder than any siren. The courthouse in downtown Richmond wasn't new to controversy. Its marble steps had carried the weight of countless scandals, lawsuits, and criminal trials. But when Monique Robinson's case landed on the docket, the building itself seemed to vibrate with a different kind of energy. This wasn't just another dispute between citizen and state. It was a battle over the truth, and whether authority could smother it under paperwork, denials, and rehearsed statements. Inside the modest conference room of Reed & Associates, Anthony Reed spread out the lawsuit on the table. "We've got everything lined up," he said firmly, pointing to the complaint's first page. "Unlawful removal from private property, civil rights violation, and racial discrimination. The police department will push back, but they can't erase your name from that deed." Monique studied the document with calm intensity. She wasn't a stranger to paperwork, but this wasn't like reviewing contracts or compliance filings. This was her life, her dignity, compressed into legal jargon and stapled pages. "They'll try," she said softly. Danielle Moore, seated nearby, leaned forward. "Let them try. They can't change what happened. I was there. I'll testify to every word they said." Anthony nodded. "Good. Witness testimony will matter, especially when it contradicts their report." He held up a copy of the officer's filing. "According to them, you refused to provide proof of ownership and became argumentative. That's their cover." David Robinson slammed his fist lightly on the table. "That's a lie. She gave them her ID. She told them to check county records. They didn't want the truth. They wanted control." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "Exactly, and that's where we'll hit them hardest." At the Richmond Police Department, the mood was shifting. The lawsuit had drawn unwanted attention. Local news stations replayed footage of Monique outside the Jefferson Towers, flanked by supporters, holding up a copy of her deed for the cameras. The clip went viral, amplified by national outlets hungry for stories about policing and race. Chief of Police Alan Granger stood at a podium, sweat glistening on his forehead under the press lights. "Our officers responded to a call from building management and acted in accordance with standard procedures," he declared. "The matter is now subject to legal review, and we respect that process." Reporters peppered him with questions. Why didn't the officers check county records? Why was a deed ignored? Why was a black property owner treated like a trespasser? Granger's answers grew sharper. "I'm not going to speculate on ongoing litigation. What I will say is that our officers put their lives on the line every day and deserve the benefit of the doubt." The phrase ignited the community like gasoline on fire. "Benefit of the doubt for whom?" one editorial demanded. Because Monique Robinson got none. In a cramped office at the precinct, Officer Brad Kingston leaned back in his chair, chewing gum with exaggerated confidence. "They're making this into a circus," he muttered. "Over what? A woman we asked to leave because management called us?" Officer Kyle Anderson sat across from him, less composed. "She owns the place, Brad. We both know that now. Her name's on the deed. Maybe we should have handled it differently," Kingston scoffed. "Don't start second-guessing. We followed procedure. That's all that matters." Anderson rubbed his temples. He remembered Monique's calm eyes, her steady voice, the way she said, "You're making a mistake." He hadn't thought much of it in the moment, but now those words echoed. And with every headline, every broadcast replaying her humiliation, he felt the knot in his stomach tighten. The first hearing was packed. Reporters filled the benches, cameras swarmed outside, and community members gathered with signs demanding justice. Inside, Judge Robert Hardy presided with a stone-faced calm, his gavel striking sharply to command order. Anthony Reed rose first, his voice steady but charged with conviction. "Your Honor, this case is about more than one night in a lobby. It's about the fundamental right to be secure in your own property without fear of harassment or unlawful removal. My client, Monique Robinson, holds the deed to Suite 8C. That is not up for debate. What is up for debate is why she was treated like a criminal in her own home." Across the aisle, the city's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, our officers responded to a call in good faith. Building management expressed concerns, and the officers acted appropriately to ensure the safety of residents. This is a case of misunderstanding, not malice." The words rang hollow. Judge Hardy's eyes flicked toward Monique, seated calmly beside Anthony, her posture regal despite the tension. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone contradicted every excuse. When Danielle Moore took the stand, she didn't mince words. "They never asked to see the deed. They never called the county. They looked at her ID and brushed it off. They didn't want proof. They wanted her gone," the courtroom murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. Anthony let the silence hang before driving the point home. "So, to be clear, Ms. Moore, the officers had the opportunity to verify her ownership but chose not to?" "Yes," Danielle said firmly. "They chose not to." Back at the police department, murmurs spread among the rank and file. Some officers defended Kingston and Anderson, insisting they had only done their jobs. Others whispered that the two had gone too far, that their arrogance might drag the whole department into scandal. And in the quiet corners of the city, community leaders began organizing marches. Flyers announced rallies on courthouse steps. Social media lit up with hashtags, "Eject her name is on the deed," and "Justice for Monique." What the public didn't know yet was that federal investigators had started to take notice. The complaint filed by Anthony Reed triggered interest beyond Richmond. Reports of similar incidents in the department's past raised red flags. Quietly, agents began pulling files, reviewing arrest records, and compiling data. Among them was Agent Laura Mitchell, sharp-eyed and relentless. Flipping through pages late one evening, she spotted the pattern. Kingston and Anderson's names appeared again and again on questionable stops involving black residents. Too many to be coincidence. She tapped the file with her pen. "This isn't just one bad night," she told her partner, Agent Victor Allen. "This is systemic." Allen nodded. "Then it's time to watch the courtroom, because when this blows open, we'll be ready." By the end of the week, the pressure was undeniable. Monique Robinson's name dominated the headlines. Her calm dignity contrasted sharply with the defensive bluster of the police department. And with every new revelation, the city's veneer of order cracked further. One evening, Monique walked with David down the steps of the courthouse after another hearing. Reporters swarmed, microphones extended, questions shouted. Monique paused, her voice clear and steady. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said, "but I will see it through, because this isn't about me alone. It's about the next person who walks into their own home and is told they don't belong. That ends here." The clip aired nationwide, and overnight, Monique Robinson became more than a plaintiff. She became a symbol, and symbols once unleashed are harder to silence than any individual voice. The legal firestorm was just beginning. The Richmond courthouse had always been a local stage, a place where neighbors sat in the gallery and whispered about trials like they were episodes of a long-running drama. But Monique Robinson's case pulled the curtain back to reveal something far bigger. By the second week of hearings, television trucks lined the street outside, satellite dishes aimed skyward, reporters broadcasting live updates every hour. Local news anchors introduced her as the homeowner ejected from her own suite. National networks called it the Richmond deed scandal. For Monique, the noise outside didn't matter. What mattered was the evidence inside, and it was piling up. In a nondescript federal office across town, Agent Laura Mitchell leaned over a stack of case files spread across a steel desk. The fluorescent lights flickered above her, but her focus didn't waver. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Officers Kingston and Anderson involved in questionable arrests, almost all of them targeting black residents in predominantly white neighborhoods. She tapped a report with her pen. Trespassing, no proof. Arrested, dropped charges. Another page. Suspicious vehicle. No citation. Driver released. Over and over the same story. Different names, same tactics. Her partner, Agent Victor Allen, crossed his arms. They've been doing this for years, and nobody pushed back until now. Mitchell's eyes sharpened. Until Monique Robinson, until a deed stamped and filed with the county. This isn't about one night in a luxury building. This is about systemic abuse. Allen nodded. Then we need to move. Quietly. If we go in too soon, they'll bury the evidence. If we wait too long, the department will close ranks. Mitchell closed the file. We'll let the courtroom keep the spotlight, and we'll use the shadows to build our case. Back in the courtroom, the tension thickened. Each day, reporters packed the benches, scribbling every word. Camera crews clustered outside, catching every statement from attorneys and supporters. One evening, Monique walked out flanked by her attorney Anthony Reed and her brother David. A reporter called out, "Monique, what do you say to people who think this was just a misunderstanding?" Monique stopped, her gaze steady on the cameras. "A misunderstanding ends when the truth is offered. I showed my ID. I told them where to check. They chose to ignore it. That's not misunderstanding. That's willful." The clip ran on evening broadcasts nationwide. Commentators debated it on talk shows. Editorials appeared in major newspapers. One headline read, "She had the deed, they had the power. Guess who won that night?" Meanwhile, the Richmond Police Department scrambled. Chief Alan Granger called closed-door meetings, demanding loyalty and discipline. Officers whispered in hallways, their voices tight with unease. Some defended Kingston and Anderson. Others avoided the subject entirely, afraid of where it might lead. In a small office, Kingston fumed. "They're painting me like some kind of villain," he growled, slamming his fist on the desk. "We responded to a call, that's all." Kyle Anderson sat quietly, his face pale. "She owns the place, Brad. Her name's on the deed. This isn't going away." Kingston sneered. "So what? Management called. We did our job. End of story." Anderson hesitated, then spoke carefully. "You ever think maybe we crossed a line? Maybe we should have verified?" Kingston's eyes narrowed. "Watch yourself. Doubt gets you burned in this department." But Anderson couldn't silence the knot tightening in his chest. Every headline made it worse. Every courtroom update made him question the story he had signed his name to. Inside the courthouse, Judge Robert Hardy grew increasingly impatient with the city's defense. Each day, the excuses grew thinner. Each explanation sounded more rehearsed. When the city's attorney insisted the officers acted in good faith, Hardy leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Good faith does not excuse failure to verify. Good faith does not excuse ejecting a property owner from her own home. If this is the defense you're relying on, you'll need more than rhetoric to support it." The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. The defense attorney flushed, mumbling about ongoing reviews. Anthony Reed seized the moment. Rising from his seat, he spoke with quiet authority. "Your Honor, the truth is simple. The officers had a choice. They could verify. They could listen. They could respect the deed. Instead, they chose prejudice. And now they want this court to call it procedure." Hardy's gavel struck once. "We'll hear the next witness." On the stand again, Danielle Moore faced sharp cross-examination. The city's attorney tried to paint her as biased, as a loyal friend exaggerating the events. "Ms. Moore," the attorney pressed, "isn't it true that emotions were high that night? That perhaps your memory of events is clouded by your close relationship with Ms. Robinson?" Danielle didn't flinch. "My memory is clear. I saw them escort her out. I heard them dismiss her proof. I remember every word because I knew exactly what was happening." "And what was that?" the attorney asked, his tone skeptical. Danielle's voice carried through the courtroom. "They didn't see a homeowner. They saw a black woman they could humiliate, and that's all they cared about." The gallery murmured, the words echoing off the walls. Outside, marches filled the streets. Protesters carried signs. "Her name is on the deed," and "Stop policing ownership." Chants echoed through downtown, demanding accountability. Community leaders gave speeches on courthouse steps, invoking Monique's name as a rallying cry. David Robinson often joined, his voice strong as he addressed the crowds. "This isn't just about one building. It's about every family told they don't belong. It's about every door closed in someone's face. We won't stop until justice is real." Monique, though, stayed mostly quiet outside the courtroom. Her strength was in her composure. Her silence in the face of arrogance spoke louder than any chant. Behind the scenes, Agent Laura Mitchell and Agent Victor Allen dug deeper. They subpoenaed records quietly, reviewing years of reports. The pattern was undeniable. Kingston and Anderson repeatedly listed trespassing as justification, often in neighborhoods where black residents were rare. Mitchell flipped through a stack of files. "It's the same script every time. Call comes in, they escalate, no verification. Charges dropped or dismissed later, but by then, the damage is done." Allen nodded grimly. "It's not policing, it's harassment with a badge." Mitchell closed the file. "When the time comes, we'll lay it bare. Not just for this case, for every case they buried under excuses." Back at the department, Anderson's unease turned into cracks. He avoided reporters, ducked questions, and flinched every time Kingston barked about loyalty. One night, sitting in his car outside his modest home, he stared at the lawsuit papers again. His signature sat on the report. His name tied him to the lie. For the first time, he wondered if silence would destroy him more than loyalty. Kingston, by contrast, grew louder. He told colleagues the department would protect him, that the courts would back him. He bragged in the break room that Monique's case would collapse once the noise died down. But his smirk no longer convinced everyone. Some avoided him. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe. By the third week, the trial had shifted from a local scandal to a national spectacle. Cable news aired daily recaps. Commentators debated policing, property rights, and systemic racism. Editorials demanded reform. Inside the courtroom, Anthony Reed sharpened his attacks. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a certified copy of the deed, "this document predates the incident by years. My client owned the suite outright. Yet these officers, armed with badges and arrogance, stripped her of her rights in front of witnesses. If the court accepts this as protocol, then ownership itself means nothing." The defense attorney sputtered about procedure, about calls for safety, about misunderstanding, but every word sounded thinner. Judge Hardy leaned forward, his voice steady but cutting. "The truth of ownership is not in dispute. The question is why the officers ignored it. And that is a question this court will answer." The gallery erupted in murmurs. For Monique, the trial had become larger than herself. Each day she felt the weight of those who rallied outside, those who sent letters of support, those who whispered "thank you" in courthouse hallways. She hadn't asked to become a symbol, but symbols, once born, carried their own momentum. David reminded her each night, "This isn't just your fight anymore, it's everyone's fight." She nodded quietly, but inside she knew. The fight wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the records federal agents were compiling. It was in the doubt gnawing at Anderson's conscience. It was in the arrogance Kingston flaunted as though it would shield him forever. And soon all those threads would collide. As the sun set over Richmond one evening, Agent Mitchell closed a file, her eyes sharp with resolve. "They think this trial is about one woman and one suite," she said. "But it's about every abuse they buried. And when we step in, we'll expose it all." Victor Allen leaned back, arms crossed. "When do we move?" Mitchell's voice was calm, certain. "When the courtroom is packed, when the defense is weakest, when the truth will explode loud enough to shake the whole department." Allen smiled faintly. "Then the city won't know what hit them, and neither would Kingston or Anderson, because the storm was no longer coming. It was already here." The morning sun poured through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as people filed in. By now, the Richmond trial had become an attraction in its own right. College students skipped classes to watch, church groups organized carpools to attend, and reporters from networks as far as New York and Los Angeles scrambled for seats. In the middle of it all sat Monique Robinson, calm and composed, dressed in tailored confidence. To some, she was a plaintiff. To others, she was a symbol. And to the two officers who had dragged her out of her own suite, she was a living reminder of the truth they couldn't escape. Officer Kyle Anderson sat in the department break room that morning, staring into his coffee like it might provide answers. The chatter of his colleagues swirled around him, some mocking the case, others brushing it off as media noise. But Anderson couldn't shake the weight pressing against his chest. He had signed the report. His name sat beside Kingston's, stamped on the narrative that painted Monique as a trespasser. Yet every night when he closed his eyes, he saw her steady gaze. Not fearful, not angry, just certain. Kingston barged in, his usual swagger filling the space. "Court's a joke," he muttered. "They'll drag it out, then it'll fade. Always does." Anderson didn't reply. He simply took another sip of coffee, the silence louder than words. Across town, Agent Laura Mitchell reviewed her team's files once more. Case after case lined the table, each marked with Kingston and Anderson's names. She knew the timing had to be precise. Step in too early, and the city would claim overreach. Step in too late, and the trial's momentum could fade. Her partner, Agent Victor Allen, entered with a folder. "We've got what we need," he said. "Surveillance logs, internal memos, dropped charges, all pointing to a pattern. It's not just negligence, it's deliberate." Mitchell closed the folder and stood. "Then it's time. We don't wait for the defense to collapse. We make sure it does." Judge Robert Hardy entered with his usual brisk authority, gavel striking once. "We will resume testimony." Anthony Reed rose, his voice clear. "Your Honor, we call Officer Kyle Anderson to the stand." The gallery stirred. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching faster. Anderson shifted uncomfortably as he walked to the witness box, avoiding Monique's calm eyes. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and sat down. Reed's opening question cut straight to the heart. "Officer Anderson, on the night of September 14th, did you and your partner encounter my client, Monique Robinson, in the lobby of Jefferson Towers?" Anderson cleared his throat. "Yes." "Did she provide you with identification?" "Yes." "Did she inform you she owned Suite 8C? "Yes." The murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Anthony Reed leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "And did you verify her ownership through county records or building files?" Anderson hesitated. Kingston, seated at the defense table, shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Anderson swallowed. "No, we didn't." The gallery erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order, but the momentum had already shifted. The city's attorney rushed to salvage the damage. "Officer Anderson, isn't it true you were responding to a call from building management? That you were acting to ensure resident safety?" Anderson nodded slowly. "That's true, but—" He stopped himself, the word hanging in the air. "But what, officer?" the attorney pressed. Anderson's voice dropped, heavy with a weight he could no longer carry. "But we should have verified. She told us where to check. We ignored it." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Monique sat perfectly still, her face calm but her eyes sharper than ever. Back at the defense table, Officer Brad Kingston gripped his chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. His partner's hesitation wasn't loyalty, it was betrayal. He leaned toward his attorney, muttering under his breath. But the tension in his shoulders betrayed the truth. His wall of arrogance was cracking. That afternoon, just as the courthouse prepared for recess, the doors opened and a quiet stir rippled through the room. Agent Laura Mitchell and Agent Victor Allen entered, their federal badges gleaming. They took seats in the back row, silent observers. But their presence carried weight. The gallery noticed, the defense noticed, and the officers noticed most of all. Anthony Reed clocked their arrival and smiled faintly. The cavalry wasn't here to watch, they were here to act. By the time court adjourned, the courthouse steps were a sea of voices. Protesters waved signs, chanted Monique's name, and demanded reform. Reporters swarmed Anthony Reed as he exited, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Reed, how significant is Officer Anderson's testimony?" Reed didn't hesitate. "It's the first crack in a wall that's been protecting misconduct for years. And once walls crack, they collapse." Monique exited moments later, flanked by David and Danielle. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but she stopped briefly to speak. "I told the truth from the beginning," she said. "Now the truth is finding its way out." Inside the precinct that night, Kingston confronted Anderson. The room was tense, the air thick. "You folded," Kingston snarled. "You let them twist you." Anderson's jaw clenched. "I told the truth." "The truth?" Kingston barked, stepping closer. "The truth is what keeps this department together. You think they'll protect you now? You're finished. You're done." Anderson didn't reply, but for the first time, he didn't back down either. Later that evening, Mitchell and Allen reviewed the day's testimony in their office. Mitchell leaned back, her expression calculating. "Anderson's break was exactly what we needed. The court has cracks, the defense has cracks, and the public is watching. Now we move." Allen nodded. "We subpoena everything, internal reports, prior cases, surveillance footage. We lay the foundation so when the hammer drops, there's nowhere for them to hide." Mitchell's voice carried the certainty of inevitability. "By the time we're finished, this won't just be about Monique Robinson. It'll be about every name they buried under lies." Richmond buzzed with the story. Talk radio hosts dissected the case. Editorial boards called for investigations. Churches held prayer vigils for Monique. And in living rooms across America, families watched the news and shook their heads, recognizing the story too well. Monique Robinson wasn't just a woman with a deed. She had become a mirror. And what people saw in that mirror was a truth long denied, that ownership and rights could be stripped away in seconds if prejudice wore a uniform. As the courthouse prepared for another day, the atmosphere thickened. Kingston sat at the defense table, fury simmering just beneath the surface. Anderson sat apart, shoulders heavy but straighter than before. The city's attorneys scrambled with folders of excuses, their confidence slipping with every headline. And in the gallery, federal agents Mitchell and Allen waited patiently, knowing that the moment for silence was ending. Because soon, the truth wouldn't just trickle out of hesitant testimony, it would explode. The following week began with a storm of paper, not rain. Subpoenas landed on the Richmond Police Department like thunderclaps, requests for arrest records, internal reports, disciplinary files, and every complaint tied to officers Brad Kingston and Kyle Anderson. At first, the department tried to downplay it. A press release insisted it was routine procedure. But behind the scenes, panic spread. Filing cabinets were pulled open, computers searched, and whispers passed through the hallways like wildfire. For Kingston, it was more than an inconvenience. It was a threat. He slammed his locker shut in the precinct, the metal echoing down the corridor. "This is a witch hunt," he barked to anyone listening. "We did our jobs, that's all. But fewer colleagues met his eye now. The swagger that once made him untouchable was cracking. Some officers nodded politely before walking away. Others avoided him altogether. His name, once loud in the halls, was now whispered in corners. Anderson watched it unfold with quiet unease. He had always stayed in Kingston's shadow, but the subpoenas made him realize the shadow was shrinking. "They've got the files, Brad," he said one afternoon, his voice low. "This isn't going away." Kingston sneered. "Files don't prove anything. It's all about the story you tell, and I'll tell mine better than anyone." But Anderson wasn't so sure anymore. When court resumed, Anthony Reed wasted no time. He rose, a thick binder in his hands. "Your Honor, pursuant to federal subpoenas, we have obtained records detailing not just the night in question, but years of prior incidents involving officers Kingston and Anderson." The defense attorney objected immediately, voice strained. "Irrelevant, prejudicial." Judge Hardy raised a hand. "Overruled. If the records establish a pattern, the court will hear them." The gallery stirred. Reporters leaned forward, pens racing. Reed opened the binder. "In the last 5 years, officers Kingston and Anderson have been involved in 32 stops of black residents in predominantly white neighborhoods. In 29 of those cases, charges were dismissed or dropped due to lack of evidence. In 14, citizens filed complaints of harassment. Not one was upheld by the department. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Kingston's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into a glare. Reed continued, his voice steady but sharp. "This is not coincidence. This is not bad luck. This is a pattern, a deliberate abuse of authority. And my client, Monique Robinson, is simply the first who had the irrefutable proof they couldn't ignore, her name on a deed." Through it all, Monique sat calm, her posture unyielding. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile, she let the evidence speak. Reporters noted it in their coverage, her steady composure against the officers' tightening anger. "She doesn't have to raise her voice," one columnist wrote. "Her silence is louder than their excuses." That afternoon, the quiet presence of agents Laura Mitchell and Victor Allen shifted. For days, they had sat in the back row, silent observers. But now Mitchell rose, approaching the bench with the authority of her badge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "The Department of Justice has opened a formal investigation into the Richmond Police Department's practices, with particular focus on officers Kingston and Anderson. We are prepared to assist the court in reviewing the subpoenaed records." Gasps echoed through the gallery. The defense attorney sputtered in protest. Judge Hardy rapped his gavel for silence. "Proceed," he ordered. Kingston's face drained of color. For the first time, his smirk faltered. That evening, Anderson sat in his car outside the precinct, the weight of the day pressing on him. He stared at his hands on the steering wheel, remembering the testimony, the binder of records, the federal agents stepping forward. His conscience gnawed at him. He had followed Kingston for years, never questioning, never resisting, but now the lies were unraveling, and he was tethered to them. His phone buzzed. A text from Kingston. "We stick to the story. Don't fold." Anderson turned the phone face down, exhaling slowly. For the first time, he considered what folding might mean. Not weakness, but freedom. Outside the courthouse, the marches grew louder. Protesters carried enlarged copies of Monique's deed, printed on posters for all to see. Chants filled the air. "Her name is on the deed." "No more lies." Church leaders gave speeches about justice. Local business owners joined the rallies. National figures tweeted their support. Richmond wasn't just dealing with a local scandal anymore. It was a city under a national microscope. At home, Kingston paced his living room, rage boiling. He turned the TV off after seeing Monique's face on the news again. He muttered to himself, convinced the world was against him. "They don't get it," he growled. "We're the line. We're the ones who keep order. And this is the thanks we get?" But deep down, beneath the anger, a sliver of fear had taken root. He could hear it in his attorney's voice, see it in his colleagues' eyes. The system that had always protected him was wavering. and he didn't know how to survive without it. The next day in court, Anthony Reed called Agent Mitchell to the stand. Her testimony was measured, factual, but devastating. Over the course of our preliminary investigation, we identified not only repeated misconduct, but deliberate suppression of complaints within the Richmond Police Department. Internal reviews were routinely closed without investigation. Officers Kingston and Anderson's names appeared disproportionately in those complaints. The defense attorney objected, but Judge Hardy overruled again. "The court will hear it," Mitchell continued. "We also recovered security footage from Jefferson Towers showing officers Kingston and Anderson in the lobby prior to their interaction with Ms. Robinson. In that footage, they are seen speaking with the building manager and laughing moments before approaching her. The timestamp confirms this occurred after Ms. Robinson provided her ID. Gasps filled the courtroom. Kingston clenched his fists under the table, his attorney whispering frantically. Mitchell concluded calmly, "This evidence suggests the officers had knowledge of her identity before removing her, undermining their claim of good faith." The gallery erupted in murmurs. The truth was no longer trickling out, it was pouring. For the first time, Monique took the stand. Her voice was calm, deliberate, every word chosen with precision. "I bought that suite with my own money after years of work. It was mine. But that night, none of it mattered. They didn't see a deed. They didn't see a homeowner. They saw someone they could dismiss, someone they could humiliate." Her eyes swept the courtroom, steady as stone. "But humiliation doesn't erase truth. My name is on that deed, and it always will be." The silence that followed was heavy, reverent. Even the defense attorney didn't dare interrupt. By the end of the day, the momentum was undeniable. The defense scrambled, the city officials squirmed, and Kingston's confidence bled away with each revelation. Anderson sat slumped, his face pale, caught between loyalty and conscience. And Monique Robinson sat tall, the storm swirling around her but never shaking her. Judge Hardy adjourned with words that echoed through the chamber. "This court will not tolerate lies masquerading as procedure. The truth is surfacing, and it will be heard." The gavel struck, and with it, the blue wall around Kingston and Anderson cracked a little further. By the 7th week of hearings, Richmond felt like a city under siege, not by violence but by truth. Newspaper headlines screamed about misconduct. Local talk radio dissected every testimony. Social media feeds buzzed with clips of Monique Robinson's calm composure in court, juxtaposed against the red-faced defensiveness of police officials. For some, it was vindication. For others, humiliation. But for the officers at the center of it all, it was the beginning of the end. Officer Brad Kingston had built his reputation on arrogance. He strutted through the precinct like he owned it, barking orders, smirking at critics, daring anyone to challenge him. But that confidence now leaked away like air from a punctured tire. Colleagues avoided his gaze. Conversations halted when he entered the room. Some whispered about transfers, others about retirement. Few wanted to be tethered to a sinking ship. One night, Kingston sat at a bar on the city's west side, whiskey in hand, ranting to whoever would listen. "They don't get it. They don't understand what it's like out there. You see someone who doesn't fit, you act. You don't hesitate. That's how you survive." But even the bartender, polishing glasses behind the counter, offered no reply. Kingston's words, once laced with swagger, now sounded desperate. Across town, Kyle Anderson sat at his kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the subpoenaed files he had brought home. He read line after line of complaints, names of black residents, traffic stops, trespassing accusations, all tied to him and Kingston. He rubbed his temples. He had known. Deep down, he had always known. But seeing it laid bare in black and white made denial impossible. His wife entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have to do what's right," she whispered. Anderson's voice cracked. "If I speak up, Kingston will bury me. The department will turn its back." She squeezed his shoulder. "And if you don't, you bury yourself." Meanwhile, Agent Laura Mitchell and Agent Victor Allen pressed forward with surgical precision. Their subpoenas revealed not only misconduct but deliberate cover-ups. Supervisors had dismissed complaints with one-line notes. Unsubstantiated. No evidence of bias. Mitchell flipped through the files, her eyes narrowing. It's not just Kingston and Anderson. It's the entire chain of command. They enabled this. Allen nodded. Then we widen the net, let the department know the days of silence are over. Mitchell smiled faintly. And when we move in court. The next day, the courtroom was electric. Anthony Reed called another witness, an internal affairs officer forced under subpoena. The man shifted nervously on the stand as Reed pressed him. Officer Daniels, is it correct that you reviewed complaints against Kingston and Anderson? Yes. And how many were dismissed? Most of them. On what grounds? Daniels hesitated. Lack of evidence. Reed leaned forward. Or lack of will. The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge demanded order. But the damage was done. The blue wall wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Through it all, Monique remained a pillar of quiet strength. She attended every hearing, sitting with poise, her expression calm but unyielding. Reporters remarked that she never raised her voice, never lashed out, never lost control. Her silence became a weapon. Where Kingston's rage betrayed weakness, her calmness radiated power. One reporter wrote, "She is not just defending herself, she is redefining ownership, showing the world that dignity cannot be stripped with handcuffs or lies." The breaking point came late in the week. During a heated exchange in court, Anthony Reed presented the Jefferson Towers security footage showing Kingston and Anderson speaking with the manager after Monique had already provided her ID. Reed's voice carried across the chamber. "So, Officer Kingston, you had knowledge of her identity before removing her. How do you explain that?" Kingston's face reddened. He leaned forward, voice rising. "She didn't belong there. I don't care what paper she had. She didn't belong." The courtroom gasped. The judge's gavel slammed, demanding silence, but the words lingered. They echoed through the gallery, through the press benches, through the cameras, capturing every second. And with that outburst, Kingston had exposed himself completely. It was never about procedure. It was about prejudice. That night, Anderson sat alone in his car, the words ringing in his ears. She didn't belong there. He thought of Monique's calm defiance, of the deed with her name on it, of the growing mountain of evidence. His phone buzzed again. A message from Kingston. "Don't fold. We go down together or not at all." Anderson stared at the screen, then deleted the message. For the first time, he wasn't sure he owed Kingston anything. News outlets replayed Kingston's outburst on a loop. Commentators dissected every word. Editorials declared it proof of systemic rot. National figures demanded accountability. One headline blared, "It was never about safety. Richmond officer admits bias in court." The department scrambled with damage control. Chief Granger gave another press conference, insisting the remarks were taken out of context. But the public wasn't buying it. Protesters filled the streets again, louder than ever. Signs now read, "She belonged then, she belongs now." In Washington, Mitchell and Allen finalized their move. They prepared indictments ready to bring not just Kingston and Anderson, but their enablers into the light. The timing was deliberate. They wanted the courtroom full, the cameras rolling, the public watching. Mitchell's voice carried calm certainty. "We let Kingston expose himself. Now we expose the system that protected him." Allen nodded. "When this hits, Richmond won't just feel the tremor, it'll feel the quake." At home that night, Monique sat with David and Danielle, sipping tea at her kitchen table. David's voice carried frustration. "They humiliated you. They lied. And now it's dragging week after week. Don't you ever feel exhausted?" Monique smiled faintly. "Of course I do, but exhaustion doesn't erase truth. And truth is what wins in the end." Danielle nodded. "You're stronger than they ever expected." Monique's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. Not stronger, just unwilling to be erased. As the week ended, the pieces aligned. Kingston unraveling, Anderson wavering. Federal agents ready to strike. and Monique, unshaken in her pursuit of justice. The city buzzed with expectation. The courtroom brimmed with tension. The nation leaned in, waiting. Because the next chapter wouldn't just reveal misconduct. It would ignite an explosion no badge, no smirk, no excuse could contain. The Richmond courthouse was packed tighter than ever. The air hummed with expectation, as if everyone inside knew the day would bring more than testimony. Reporters adjusted cameras, protesters chanted outside, and rows of attorneys shifted papers nervously. At the center of it all, Monique Robinson sat with quiet poise, her brother David at her side. When the judge entered, the gavel struck once, but the buzz in the room refused to die. Anthony Reed rose, his binder thicker than before, but before he could speak, Agent Laura Mitchell stood from the back row, her badge gleaming under the courtroom lights. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm and measured, "on behalf of the Department of Justice, I am here to present federal indictments against officers Brad Kingston and Kyle Anderson, along with supervisory officials complicit in suppressing misconduct complaints." The gallery erupted in gasps. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Judge Hardy's gavel slammed down. "Order! Order in the court!" Mitchell handed sealed documents to the clerk. These indictments include obstruction of justice, falsification of records, and civil rights violations. The evidence is conclusive. Kingston's face turned crimson. He jumped from his seat, shouting, "This is a setup. You can't do this." The gavel struck again, louder. "Sit down, Officer Kingston, or I will have you removed." But Kingston didn't sit. His arrogance, once a shield, now betrayed desperation. "I've served this city for 15 years. You think you can erase that with a stack of papers?" Anthony Reed didn't flinch. He simply turned, his voice cutting through Kingston's fury. "No one's erasing your years, officer. We're exposing them." As the courtroom settled, all eyes turned to Kyle Anderson. He sat pale, hands trembling, the indictment in front of him like a weight too heavy to bear. Mitchell's voice cut through the silence. "Officer Anderson, your name appears in these files repeatedly. You can continue down this path, or you can tell the truth. The choice is yours." The defense attorney leaned toward him, whispering frantically, but Anderson shook his head. For weeks, guilt had eaten at him. The subpoenas, the files, the marches, everything pointed to the same truth. Silence had made him complicit. Slowly, he stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice breaking, "I can't do this anymore." Gasps rippled through the room. Kingston whipped his head around, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare!" But Anderson's voice steadied. "That night, Monique Robinson showed us her ID. She told us exactly how to verify her ownership. We ignored her. Not because we didn't know, because we didn't care. Brad said she didn't belong, and I didn't stop him. That's the truth." The courtroom froze. Even Judge Hardy leaned back, absorbing the words. Anthony Reed's voice rose. "So to be clear, Officer Anderson, you are admitting the report you signed was false?" "Yes." Anderson's shoulders sagged. "I lied. I followed Kingston's lead. I've done it before, too many times." Kingston slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "You're weak! You're throwing us all under the bus!" But no one listened. The tide had turned. Outside the courthouse, word of Anderson's testimony spread like wildfire. Protesters cheered, chanting louder. "The wall is breaking," one sign read. Inside the precinct, officers gathered in stunned silence as the news played on TV screens. Some muttered in disbelief, others looked away, shame creeping across their faces. The blue wall of silence, the unspoken code to protect each other, was collapsing in real time. Chief Granger called an emergency meeting, his voice strained. "We will cooperate with federal authorities," he announced, but the officers in the room exchanged wary glances. Cooperation was no longer a choice. It was survival. That afternoon, Monique took the stand again. Her voice was steady, her words simple. "I told them the truth that night. They chose lies. But today, the lies are unraveling. This isn't about one suite. It's about accountability, and accountability is finally here." Her testimony was replayed across networks. Her calm composure contrasted against Kingston's rage and Anderson's collapse. One anchor put it simply, She held her ground, and the truth bent toward her. The next day, Kingston returned to court visibly shaken. Gone was the smirk, the arrogance. His eyes darted, his jaw clenched, but his swagger had vanished. When the prosecution presented evidence of prior complaints, citizens describing almost identical encounters, Kingston erupted again. "They're lying, all of them." Judge Hardy's gavel struck. "One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." Kingston slumped back into his chair, sweat glistening on his forehead. For the first time, he looked less like an officer and more like a man cornered. Meanwhile, Anderson leaned fully into his testimony. He admitted to falsified reports, ignored complaints, and the pressure of loyalty that kept him silent. He named supervisors who dismissed complaints without review. Anthony Reed pressed him gently. "Why speak now?" Anderson's voice wavered, but his words were clear. "Because silence has consequences, and I can't carry them anymore." It wasn't redemption in full, but it was a step, a crack in the culture of silence that had shielded men like Kingston for years. Agents Mitchell and Allen wasted no time. With Anderson's cooperation, they expanded the investigation, issuing subpoenas for supervisors who buried complaints. Names surfaced, captains, lieutenants, even deputy chiefs. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was systemic. Mitchell's words in a press briefing were sharp. "This is not just about two officers. This is about a department that chose silence over accountability. That ends now." Across Richmond, the reaction was electric. Marches swelled larger. Churches rang bells in solidarity. Community centers held forums where residents shared their own stories of harassment. One elderly man stood at a microphone, voice trembling. 30 years ago, they pulled me over in my own neighborhood, said I didn't belong. I thought nobody would believe me, but today, someone finally did." His words drew tears from the crowd. The case was no longer about one deed. It was about every moment of prejudice residents had endured in silence. At home, Kingston paced in darkness, blinds drawn. His phone buzzed with messages from former allies, short, cold texts distancing themselves. His attorney urged him to remain quiet, but silence felt like suffocation. He replayed the courtroom in his mind. Anderson's betrayal, Monique's calm defiance, Mitchell's indictments. For the first time, fear eclipsed arrogance. He whispered to himself, "They won't take me down. They can't." But deep down, he knew they could, and they were. As the week closed, Judge Hardy set a firm tone. "This court will proceed swiftly. The people of this city deserve answers, and they will have them." Monique left the courthouse that day, surrounded by supporters, but her expression remained steady. She knew the fight wasn't over. The indictments were a victory, Anderson's testimony a breakthrough, but the collapse of the department's lies was still unfolding. For Kingston, the walls were closing in. For Anderson, the burden was lifting. For Richmond, a reckoning had begun. And for Monique Robinson, vindication was no longer a distant hope. It was here. By the 9th week of hearings, Richmond was no longer just a city hosting a trial. It was a city living inside one. Restaurants buzzed with debates about the case. Church sermons echoed Monique Robinson's name as an example of dignity under fire. Editorials described the trial as a mirror held up to the soul of the city. And inside the courthouse, the walls that once protected officers Brad Kingston and Kyle Anderson were falling brick by brick. When the federal indictments landed, they didn't stop at the officers. Captains, lieutenants, and even deputy chiefs were called to testify. For years, they had signed off on reports, dismissed complaints, and ignored red flags. Now, under oath, they faced pointed questions. Anthony Reed's voice cut sharp. "Captain Wallace, you dismissed a complaint against Officer Kingston in 2019, citing lack of evidence. Did you interview the complainant?" The captain shifted in his seat. "No." "Did you review the security footage provided?" "No." "So what evidence did you actually examine?" Silence.